individuals that are at the coalface on the ground and people in their communities too. Secondly, it also highlighted that we are really working in partnership with communities in some of the poorest parts of the world. No country can address epidemics like TB or Ebola alone. It's through partnerships that we're going to continue to make great strides forward and combat some of these huge challenges facing our world today. So as you go back to work or school after time off over the summer, do take time to think of the millions of people around the world you're standing with and how the campaign actions you've taken so far this year are having real impact. It's really important. So tonight, we are going to be turning our attention back to the issue of childhood undernutrition. This is an issue we've been working on for a number of years now, and one which is not only fundamental to millions of children's cognitive development and physical growth, but it's the cornerstone of a whole pile of other development efforts as well. Nutrition underpins so many issues, from child health and tuberculosis to ensuring that children learn at school and complete a quality education. As many of you know, the most important time for good nutrition is in the first 1,000 days from the beginning of a woman's pregnancy to the second birthday of her child. What happens in those first 1,000 days determines to a large extent the course of a child's life, their ability to grow, to focus, to learn, and to succeed, and by extension, the long-term health, stability, and prosperity of the society in which that child lives. The 2016 Global Nutrition Report, now that's an annual report that tracks progress towards ending malnutrition. That report estimates that sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia each lose an estimated 11% of national income to malnutrition. And that report also showed that every £1 invested in nutrition programs yields over £16 in return. So I've got no doubt that everyone on this call will agree with me that ending hunger and malnutrition is the moral thing to do. But as these figures show, it's the smart thing to do as well. This feeling was shared by our former Prime Minister, David Cameron. He convened the Nutrition for Growth Summit back in 2013, where $4 billion was raised in nutrition-specific funding. The more technical of you may recall that when we say nutrition-specific, we're talking about interventions that directly tackle malnutrition, such as vitamin A supplementation or providing ready-to-use therapeutic foods, such as Plumpy Nut. Now, Plumpy Nut's the stuff that looks like thick peanut butter packed with extra nutrients and vitamins, and they use that when a child is severely malnourished. So some of you, I'm sure, in fact, I know some of you on the call, campaigned with us on this issue and came to Hyde Park for the IF campaign rally when all of those $4 billion were pledged. So the London Nutrition for Growth Summit was meant to be followed by another pledging summit in Rio last year, around the Olympics. However, political instability in Brazil led to a weak and disappointing event. Despite powerful addresses from Brazilian and Kenyan Olympians who spoke passionately about the need to improve nutrition globally, the most critical part of the summit was missing: political and financial commitments. Unlike the London summit, heads of state from donor and developing countries were conspicuous by their absence in Rio. And those absences included a lack of high-level representation from the UK. Disappointing. So where are we at now? So in December of last year, DFID outlined plans to work with others to make 2017 a Nutrition for Growth year, to re-energize the nutrition community, bring others on board, and kickstart a UN decade of action on nutrition. So since then, the Nutrition for Growth stakeholder group, that's a group of governments, civil society, businesses, that decided to hold a new nutrition event in Milan on the 4th of November this year. The Italian government has agreed to host it for all the other governments and their partners to make financial commitments to tackle undernutrition. This is the moment we've been waiting for, and DFID is a part of this group and will be attending the event. So this month, we want you to take time to meet with your MP now they've returned from their summer break and ask your MP to write to Priti Patel, urging her to make a bold and ambitious pledge in Milan and encourage other countries to join her. We've heard that she's expressed an interest in undernutrition in the past, and it's now time to show her that there's widespread support for this issue from the British public. We're going to be hearing more about this from Anushree Shiroor. She's our expert guest speaker on the call. But before we hear from Anushree, I'm going to ask Tom to help us do a roundup of what's been happening around the UK as your contribution to global advocacy this month. Tom.
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone. It's great to be on the call with you all tonight. Just a couple of updates from me this evening. So you may remember that Jill Price from the Store Value Group took us told us a couple of months ago that her opportunity meeting with MP Mark Crisp on a train journey back from London. She used the journey to speak with Mark about many of our campaigns and asked him to take action on issues like TB and polio. Her hard work has really paid off, as just this month she received a letter from Mark attaching the responses he'd received to the issues he raised in Westminster, including a letter from the Prime Minister on TB and AMR, and one from Priti Patel on her support for polio eradication. So well done, Jill. It's also been great to hear about so many of you sending postcards to your MPs over the summer break, reminding them of your support for international development and good quality UK aid. Several of you have shared with us the messages you sent, and it's been really inspiring to read. We were really impressed to see the Birmingham group share the action with friends and family, getting results postcards to MPs in 7 different Birmingham and West Midland constituencies. We also heard that Jay and Ricky from the Macclesfield group had a successful meeting with their local MP, David Rutley, on education and the GPE. I was wondering if Jay or Ricky would like to tell us how your meeting went. Are either of you on the line?
Yeah, hi. We had a good meeting with David Rutley. I mean, we have been lobbying him before. I remember in 2014, we wrote to him as well about the replenishment taking place then. So we again highlighted, the important role education plays, and in particular educating girls, and how it helps in eradicating the worst aspects of poverty. So we also highlighted the excellent work done by the Global Partnership for Education and the leading role UK has played in supporting GPE. But the interesting comments which David Rutley made this time was, he said, okay, you write a letter to me, which I will then pass it on to Priti Patel, highlight what your request is, but then he said, can you also, the specific request you can make of her is what she is going to do to sort of encourage other donor countries to sort of contribute more money than they've done in the past. So basically, we agreed to write a letter to him, and the 2 requests we made were, please could the UK Department for International Development pledge additional funds for GPE in the period beginning next year? And we said we would suggest $500 million. The second request was, please could you let us know what specific things you are doing to persuade your counterparts in other donor countries to contribute more money to the GPE in future than they have been doing so far. Is there anything we as individuals or as a lobbying group can do to help? And these 2 requests are for Priti Patel. So we are waiting for a reply from David Rutley. I guess they'll be getting back after the holidays this week.
Great, thanks Jay, it sounds like a really great meeting. We've also got an update from our Central London group here, who took inspiration from hearing about Sarah Corbett's craftsman work at this year's national conference, and earlier this month organised their own craftsman event in Hyde Park. So I'm going to ask one of the members to come and tell us a little bit about it.
So we all met in Hyde Park a few weeks ago, and we had loads of different craft things, and people made lots of different things. A lot of people stitched something specifically that could be sent to an MP. So, for example, we embroidered something that said "Education counts," and then send that along to an MP, along with sort of postcard or something with a little bit more detail about what we actually wanted them to do. And we just sort of felt that was something that would really catch the eye of whoever saw us. It would really make them kind of, rather than going in like the sort of usual pile of letters, and make them think and remember what we had done and see that people actually cared enough to take some time and make something that was really worthwhile. I think we've got a picture of something that someone made, do we?
The picture's not working.
But we'll
post it on the group,
on the group,
Facebook, and on our blog, if anyone wants to read our blog.
Yeah, we've
Like
got
a blog.
a great blog.
And we can also share it around the next group leader update.
Yeah. Yeah, so there were some very impressive things made, mainly by people who weren't me. But yeah, it was a really good fun day.
Great, thank you so much. Does anybody have, I think we're losing the whiteboard behind me there. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share this evening?
I've got something from Birmingham Group.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Right, we had a good result. Vicky, one of the participants here in the Birmingham Group, had her, I think it was a sister, wrote a letter to an MP in Cambridge, the MP of Cambridge, the city, and he wrote a big long letter back. It was as a reaction to her postcard, which I think we've sent that on through to the results office. But it was he was obviously aching to talk about overseas aid, wanted to engage with somebody in Cambridge about it. So we, from generating that one little postcard, we got quite a good reaction from the Cambridge MP. So things are looking, those little postcards obviously made a bit of a difference. So I just thought I'd let the groups know.
Great. Anybody else? All right, thanks everyone. Hand over back to Aaron.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tom. I'm really delighted to introduce on tonight's call our expert speaker for this evening. She is Results' very own Anushree Shiroor. She leads our policy work on nutrition. Good evening, Anushree. Better pop off mute if you want us to hear you.
Who's off mute?
I just said hi.
Okay, so welcome. Thanks a lot for joining us this evening. So Anushree's focus in the office is on nutrition. She works on mobilizing greater resources to tackle all forms of malnutrition and also on influencing domestic and global policies for greater impact and accountability. As you can imagine, nutrition can get quite technical. Anushree's not just a policy wonk. She has previously actually worked with UNICEF India on nutrition program implementation. And so she's got a great bunch of practical experience as well. Also has research experience in maternal and child health and nutrition in Asia and Africa. Anushree is also a member of the steering group of the Scaling Up Nutrition Civil Society Network, which means she's connected right in at the very top level of global conversations about nutrition. So welcome, Anushree. I guess you can see who you're on the call with, and you hear us talking about the grassroots all the time in the office. But just, for the record, we've got people from all the way up in Scotland and all the way down on the south coast. I know that you've bumped into a few of these people at the national conference earlier this year and so on, but really, here's our network. So as per normal, we have got 4 pre-prepared questions for you, and then we're going to open up the floor. For those of you on your computers who are able to access the chat function on the left or right-hand side of the screen, feel free to type questions in there at any time. For those of you that are on telephones and don't want to yell out your question, but would rather write it via text message or WhatsApp or some other kind of messaging system, the number to text in tonight is 0777 56 11178. I'll say that again. That's 0777 56 11178. So while you're thinking of your questions, we'll get right into the starter questions. I think the first one is coming from London.
So I just wanted to ask, over the past 6 months, we've seen an increase in famines in parts of Africa and the Middle East. Why is it important to tackle long-term malnutrition alongside efforts to save lives during humanitarian emergencies like famines? How is DFID doing this?
So it's really important to, firstly, hi everyone. It's really important to tackle both the long-term development side of food insecurity and nutrition insecurity alongside humanitarian, addressing malnutrition and humanitarian crises, because poor nutrition really influences the ability of people to survive and grow and develop to their potential. So if we do not intervene in beforehand to improve nutrition amongst vulnerable groups during critical stages of life, say for example infants and young children, adolescent girls and women, it is more likely that during, say there was a humanitarian crisis like a famine situation, it's more likely that they'll be more vulnerable to the impact of such a crisis, and that the resilience capacity of such vulnerable groups is highly impacted during such situations. So what we want to do is prepare these people through an improved health and nutrition status, so that in cases where there is food shortages, or we know that there is likelihood of famine taking place, then they'll be more resilient to such situations. In terms of what DFID is doing, so as Adam mentioned, that a large proportion of DFID's nutrition investment goes through nutrition-sensitive programming, which is tackling food and nutrition insecurity through agriculture, wash, health. But what we also see is that around 44% of their nutrition-sensitive investment in 2015 was allocated towards humanitarian situations, so improving food and nutrition insecurity through emergency food aid, maternal relief, etc. So what DFID is doing is, particularly through their nutrition-sensitive programming, tackling humanitarian issues, and also through their nutrition-specific programming, they're addressing severe acute malnutrition. The rates of acute malnutrition really increase during humanitarian crises because there's increased risk of infection, there's increased food shortage, absolute food shortage. So DFID is trying to balance its humanitarian work with its development work on nutrition.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anushree. We're going to go up to Manchester for the second question.
Could I say something? Just because it was difficult to hear.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, William. As long as yeah, go ahead.
No, it's not a question. It's just to ask her either to speak more slowly.
I'll do that. What I was saying was that DFID is tackling the humanitarian and the development side of nutrition through its nutrition-sensitive programming and its nutrition-specific programming. So tackling severe acute malnutrition among children under the age of 5 years, and also using its nutrition-sensitive spending on emergency food aid, material relief, and that equals 44% of its nutrition-sensitive spending. And the first question that was asked was about why is it important to tackle malnutrition in the long term alongside humanitarian efforts? And what I was saying was improving nutrition in the long term in advance of a humanitarian crisis setting in helps to improve the resilience of populations, especially vulnerable groups such as women, children, and adolescent girls, in a situation of a humanitarian condition occurring, for example, a famine. So through pathways of, say, improved health, improved survival, and better growth and development potential, we are able to equip people to be more resilient to humanitarian situations.
Thank you there.
And thanks very much for that, Anushree. And I'm going, sorry, it took me a second to get off mute there. We are now going to go up to Manchester for the second question.
Hi, it's Peter here. We asked the UK to make a pledge at the Nutrition for Growth event in Rio in 2016, but they didn't even show up. What makes you think the event in Milan is going to be any different what do we want to see Priti Patel say at the event?
So the Nutrition for Growth event in Milan was held at a very challenging time. We know that at the time Brazil was going through a lot of political turmoil. We had in the UK, we had the Brexit, we had a new Prime Minister, there was a new Secretary of State, and shortly after there was Rio Nutrition for Growth. So really speaking, it was very challenging to get high-level UK representation at Rio. And even though there was DFID attending, the absence of heads of state from other donor countries and governments made it really difficult for it to be a successful pledging moment. That said, since then we've had Priti Patel as the new Secretary of State, and we've had clear indication from DFID that Priti Patel has nutrition as one of her priorities amongst her development priorities. She is on the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement's leadership group, which is a group of leaders across the world. So that's a good sign. DFID's recent documents on its development aid or its aid strategy also seems to show that nutrition will continue to be a priority. So what we want Priti Patel to do in Milan is to firstly attend as a high-level minister and make a bold announcement to nutrition. Now, why we think Milan can be different to Rio is obviously now we are way past what Rio was. The political dynamics have changed. We are relatively stable in terms of elections taking place in a lot of countries, a lot of donor countries. So hopefully we can get the kind of high-level attendance that we want in Milan. Aaron also mentioned that DFID released a Nutrition for Growth roadmap last year, which identified certain moments, of which one of the moments for a pledging to take place was Nutrition for Growth in Milan. So what do we want to see Priti Patel do is to either announce new resources from its current Nutrition for Growth commitments. So we know that DFID made a huge commitment in 2013, of which a significant part of its nutrition-specific spending still remains to be disbursed. So what we could see is her announcing new programs for nutrition, or also scaling up the overall ambition as her own ownership of the issue for nutrition by making new resource commitments to nutrition. So really what we want to see Priti Patel do is show us how she's going to demonstrate her leadership. If you remember earlier this year, some of you had written to Priti Patel to show up at the World Bank meetings, which was also an opportunity, but the UK government announced an election and Priti Patel did not turn up at the World Bank meetings on nutrition. So really, this is her first public-facing moment or an opportunity where she can show what she means by continued DFID's leadership on nutrition.
Thanks, Anushree. That was really clear. We've had a couple of questions come in via text, and you'll see it in the chat as well around the exact figure that we want out of DFID. I'll let you think about that while we go on, and why we don't have that in the action materials. I'll let you think about that a bit, because I think I know the answer to that one, and that it's quite complicated. But we are going to go over to the third question to Oxford, and maybe come back to that.
Hi. So in the action materials, it's stated that for every £1 invested in nutrition interventions, £16 can be yielded in return. If investing in programs to tackle malnutrition is such a good investment, then why hasn't the money been raised already?
That's a really good question, and all of us have been trying to figure. I think one of the reasons why we haven't been able to raise the resources required is, firstly, nutrition has not been a high enough priority for all countries, be it donor countries or governments in countries suffering from a high burden of the problem itself. So it's way off the mark on the list of priorities. I don't think governments, at least in the near past, have realized what nutrition can do in terms of changing their economic outcomes, improving survival, improving the potential of women, children, and all individuals. So it's taken time for governments to realize that, and hopefully we'll see things changing soon. The second big issue is that that in order to meet the nutrition global goals, the financial gap is extremely huge. Of course, the benefit that we derive from investing in nutrition is 16 times that investment, but the investment required is really huge, and it cannot come only from either donors or government budgets or philanthropic foundations or businesses. We need all the partners and stakeholders to really up their game and come together to raise those resources, and we haven't seen that happening yet. One of the other reasons is that everyone thinks Nutrition for Growth in 2013 was a good opportunity where substantial resources were raised for nutrition. What they don't realize is that that was only a starting point for the kind of resources that are required for tackling malnutrition and reaching the ambition that the global community has set for itself in terms of ending malnutrition in all its forms by 2030. So there are a lot of factors that are involved in preventing the kind of resources that need to be raised. Did I make
That's great. That's great, Anushree. Thanks. Really good answer. So I think we're going to go over to questions now. Before we go to the yell out the question round, well, let's tackle one or two of them that have come on via the chat and via SMS to the telephone. The first one being in both places, effectively saying, quite often in our action materials when we're calling for funding for the things that we care about, we've done our homework and we've got a very specific number. We say we think the UK's fair share is, let's say for the Global Fund, over £1 billion, and we want the UK to give X. We haven't done that in these action materials. Can you talk us through a little bit behind why we're doing that? And because I think that the reason's quite a good one. It'd be good for people to understand it.
So it's been really challenging for us to identify a specific pledge for the UK. Firstly, and mainly because the UK still has its 2013 Nutrition for Growth commitment valid until 2020. So this current pledge, where it was one of the leaders amidst a set of poor leaders on nutrition, it announced substantial nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive spending over and above its 2010 baseline levels, and it was over a period of 2013 to 2020. So every time we try to think of a number, it becomes really challenging because they still haven't dispersed their current pledge. So our ask is around them disbursing their existing commitment of Nutrition for Growth money, and also simultaneously push them for an increase. But we know that that can be quite challenging given that the UK keeps talking about other donors and other governments having to come forward and take that leadership role that they took in 2013. Now, we have been trying with a lot of our global partners, civil society partners in global donor markets, as well as other in governments, to come forward during such opportunities and making that commitment. But we haven't seen that happen, so then it becomes really challenging for us to talk to DFID about being the only donor that comes forward and makes that pledge. And that's why we don't really have like a concrete figure. The other thing is that for other replenishments, Aaron, you might be able to talk us through better through this, it's easy because there is like one funding pot that we can talk about. You have the Global Fund as a mechanism, you have Gavi as a mechanism, and it helps when you work together to arrive at a target, which we haven't been able to do for nutrition because we don't have like a central mechanism as such.
Yeah, thanks, Anushree. That's really helpful. Because this is quite an important aspect of this month's action, I'll maybe reiterate what Anushree said, maybe a slightly different way, to make it even, to make it really clear to folks. The key thing here is that the UK is a leading donor on nutrition. They're doing really good work. And as Anushree said, their existing pledges, which were big when they made them, go all the way out to 2020. Now, for those of you that know cricket, speaking of 2020, for those of you that know cricket, you'll be familiar with the term of the run rate. It's how quickly you're scoring points. In this case, we can think about the run rate as to how quickly we're spending out the 2020 commitment. If with the UK government, and particularly Priti Patel, goes to Milan and makes a really big announcement and effectively re-announces the pledges that they've already made, but says we're going to spend them even faster, then that kind of clears the decks for us to go back and get an even higher pledge and even more spending in the future. So I think it is kind of tricky in the sense that they're already very, very strong here, and we've got to find clever ways of helping them to go even faster and do even more and be even better while bringing other people with them. So the concept of the run rate, I think, is potentially helpful here. We want them to speed up their spending, spend their 2020 pledge out early, and bring others with them while they do it. I hope that answers those questions. So in terms of the questions, let's take a pause from the written questions and go to the yell out questions. Does anybody on the phones have a question that they'd like to ask? I'll pause for a second, take yourself off mute and yell out.
We've got one here in the Central London group. Neil? Yeah.
Okay. I think fastest finger gets it. Go ahead, Central London.
Let's continue next week or so. Anushree. So I have a question. About, you spoke about nutrition programming and nutrition sensitive programming. Can you tell us what the difference is between those two and give us some examples on the ground of what they look like, what they do?
Okay. So
Anushree, we didn't hear the question very well. Can you say?
Neil's question was about explaining the differences between nutrition specific and nutrition sensitive programming and how those work on the ground. So nutrition specific programs are nutrition specific interventions are those interventions that tackle the direct causes of malnutrition. So the direct causes of malnutrition are really inadequate food intake or inadequate absorption of nutrition from the food that you derive, which could be as a result of, say, an infection. So it tackles the direct causes of malnutrition. Nutrition-sensitive interventions, on the other hand, are those which tackle the indirect or underlying causes of malnutrition. So say the overall food environment, food access, food availability, water and sanitation and hygiene, which could result in infections, or say maternal education or maternal reproductive health, safe pregnancies, etc., which could then impact the health of the child. So the nutrition-specific interventions have have enormous evidence backing the high-impact nutrition-specific interventions. So the Lancet series, which is a scientific journal which conducts a lot of research on which are the highest value for money and most efficient, most impactful interventions, has a series of interventions such as tackling severe acute malnutrition through therapeutic feeding for children under the age of 5, fortification of common staple foods which can improve the nutrition intake, supplementation of iron and folic acid for pregnant and lactating women, vitamin A supplementation for children under the age of 5. So all of these either improve the nutrition directly or prevent infection and thus cut the infection and malnutrition cycle. The nutrition-sensitive programming, on the other hand, are programs in agriculture, water and sanitation, hygiene, education, those investments which can contribute indirectly to improving nutrition, but whose primary focus is either, say, improving crop yields or education status, etc. Okay.
Great, that's really helpful, Anushree. Sorry, I was slightly distracted because I was trying to find the actual Lancet series, the link to paste it into the chat box. But I think that's actually a pretty strong segue into a question that came in from Deirdre and Paul. How do we know that 1 pound of aid delivers 16 pounds of value? In what areas? What does it do?
So there's also research evidence which has been conducted. So let me start with, there are global goals that we've set ourselves to achieve. So these include 6 nutrition targets, which are on reducing stunting, reducing wasting, reducing anemia in women of reproductive age, preventing any further increases in childhood overweight and obesity, increasing exclusive breastfeeding, and reducing low birth weight in infants. So these are 6 global goals that global targets that we've set up ourselves. And in order to achieve these targets, the World Bank and Results for Development, which is a think tank, have conducted some amount of research to see how much will investing in nutrition help us reach these targets. So what they've done is done like a value for money kind of assessment or analysis to see how much does investing in nutrition yield. And they've come across, and a lot of research has led them to conclude that each dollar or each pound or each individual unit of currency will yield at least 16 in return. And this figure also varies as per different targets that you want to reach. So it can be up to 35 in return in if you were to invest in improving exclusive breastfeeding. But what is also important to see is that the returns can be much higher in countries which have a higher burden of malnutrition. So say if a country has 50% of children who are malnourished, if we were to intervene in such a country as opposed to a country which has 10% of malnutrition, then the returns in the country in terms of the number of lives saved, the economic potential gained, the healthcare costs that could be averted because people are not constantly falling sick, and also the improved productivity contribution of a healthier workforce can then be calculated in terms of the returns gained from investing in nutrition. Does that answer the question?
I think so. It certainly answered it for me. And while we've been chatting, I've just dropped a couple of links into the chat box while you've been talking, Anushree, that directs people to the Lancet series from 2013, where there's far more information you would possibly ever need. We've synthesized. This is where we draw a lot of stuff that we synthesize for the background and action sheets that we give to you guys. But this is a lot of it's. Well, virtually everything we stick in there is freely available on the web. This is one of the places we get it from. Do we have some more questions? Let me see. Jill, you asked some questions in there about nutrition in the UK. If we could hold those questions to the end, I think that's not really something that we are geared up to deal with on the call this evening. Well, I do have a question here. Which I think has an interesting answer. I'm not Emily from Bournemouth. There we go. Why isn't there a partnership like the GPE or the Global Fund? If there was, would it help? Given the effect on resilience, could DEC, the Disasters and Emergency, I don't know what the C stands for, Commission? Coordination Body? I'm not sure. Could DEC help? Committee. Of course it is, a committee. Could DEC help make the case for long-term investment on nutrition?
So there were 2 questions in there. One was about DEC, and the second I've forgotten.
So the first one was, why don't we have a global fund for malnutrition?
So that's a good question, and we haven't actually been able to identify whether we need a separate global facility for nutrition, because to some extent that role is played by the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. So the Scaling Up Nutrition movement started in 2010, and now it has 57 countries signed up to the movement itself, where governments have to make a commitment to scaling up nutrition in their respective countries through improved policies, through improved financial frameworks, and through establishing multi-stakeholder partnerships to scale up nutrition. And that is one of the reasons why we don't know whether we need a global fund-like mechanism or a global financing mechanism for nutrition yet. But that's a question that civil society also keeps wondering whether we need something like that. Unfortunately, we don't have an answer yet. And the second question was about debt. So what civil society in the UK has been doing is working with DFID's nutrition team to improve the cross-departmental and cross-divisional integration. So what we realize is within DFID, you have teams working on nutrition, you have teams working on child health, on humanitarian issues, etc. What we want to do is sensitize not just the nutrition team, but also the other divisions such as debt to improving nutrition. Now, DFID's nutrition team is the focal point for its nutrition investments and spending through humanitarian as well as development efforts. Although most of the humanitarian or relief efforts take place through the disaster emergency committee. But even then, the nutrition team has a role to play in the kind of nutrition interventions that are scaled up on the ground during humanitarian situations. So what we really want to see is better coordination and better collaboration between these teams. And what we also want to see is more longer term work on nutrition rather than just focusing on certain aspects of humanitarian assistance.
That's great. So we've got one more question come in from Jill. I'm going to, before I go to that question, I just want to double check that everybody on the phone and everybody else has had a chance to ask questions.
Aaron, sorry, Aaron. This is Bentley from Linifco.
Hi, Bentley.
I just want to ask, how much is actually left in the DFID Nutrition Fund? You say it goes up to 2020.
Yeah.
How much is left from now until 2020?
So I've got the figures here from there. So this is my favorite part. So of the nutrition sensitive spending, which is around 2,127 million was what was their total commitment, which includes their 2010 baseline level. They have only roughly around 600 million left to be dispersed. And the rate at which they're dispersing their nutrition sensitive commitments, so year on year, it's around over 700 to about 900 million dollars. So last year, no, in 2015 it was around 900 million. In 2014 it was about 780, and before that it was roughly about 730. So they're really on track to spending their nutrition sensitive commitment. The nutrition specific side is where they're a little weak. So they need to still disperse around 400 million out of their roughly 600 million commitment. So there's more to be done on their nutrition specific programming, even though we know that there's great evidence to show the impact of nutrition specific interventions.
Right. So we want them to spend it faster and pledge a bit more?
Ideally, we want them to do that, yes. We want them to spend their current commitments faster and pledge greater resources to nutrition, knowing that the funding gap is huge. It cannot stop only at their 2013 commitment.
Okay. Thanks.
And just a reminder to people about how governments work in general. It will be extremely hard politically for Priti Patel to announce brand new money for nutrition over and above the hundreds of millions of pounds that she's already pledged until she's spent it. What most politicians are very fond of doing is re-announcing previous commitments as if they're new things and receiving lots of applause and all of that kind of stuff for doing something they said they were going to do anyway, or their predecessors said they were going to do. In this case, that's okay. 400 million is a bucket load of money. If they're getting that out the door a lot faster than they had originally planned, that's a big, big victory for the world. And once that's been properly announced and been properly programmed and is going out the door, that's when Priti Patel or her successor, depending on how long this takes, hopefully it's Priti Patel, is really in a position to start talking about brand new money on top of the existing pledge. But there is still quite a lot left in the pot there. Okay, so we're now down into the last 10 minutes of the call. I'm going to go to Jill's question that came in on the chat. Is Results UK doing work on WASH? Now, for those of you that are new to development or haven't worked on it before, you probably don't know what WASH means. I'm going to get Anushree to explain what it is. I know most of the letters. Water and sanitation and hygiene?
Yes, water, sanitation and hygiene.
Okay, I was hoping that A wasn't something complicated. I know water, sanitation and hygiene. So I guess you can probably guess that the answer to the question, is Results UK doing work on WASH? The answer is not so much that the executive director knows all about it, but Anushree, could you maybe talk a little bit about the link between WASH and undernutrition, and maybe how closely we work with WaterAid on that, given where some of our former colleagues have ended up?
Yeah. So we don't directly work on WASH, but we work with, as Aaron said, WaterAid, which is also one of the civil society partners on the International Coalition for Advocacy on Nutrition. So we know that their strength is on the WASH aspect of nutrition and making those linkages. So we work with WaterAid on advocating for greater integration across nutrition sensitive and nutrition specific components, including WASH. We have been working closely in engaging with DFID on how they can improve their integration across their programs. We are currently working on a report on how the impact of DFID's current nutrition programs can be improved. And a part of that is on how their programs, including WASH programs, can be made more nutrition sensitive by having clear-cut indicators, by tracking of impact. And this is, I'm going into slight technical details, but we are working with them on WASH. But as such, by ourselves, we don't work on WASH advocacy.
Anushree, can you give one very, very practical example of the intersection between WASH and nutrition in the field, as like real people experience it in their daily lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So diarrhea, which is a common childhood infection, is one of the leading child killers of children under the age of 5 years. So is malnutrition. But what happens is, if a child is not well nourished, he or she, they are more prone to infections such as diarrheal diseases. Now, a child who's malnourished and contracts diarrhea is at a higher risk of death, because they will keep losing nutrients from their body and will not be able to retain nutrients because of the diarrheal episodes. And simultaneously, because they are malnourished, they are more likely to have a longer duration of diarrheal episode and more frequent diarrheal episodes as opposed to a healthy and well-nourished child. So that cycle of diarrhea and malnutrition constantly weakens the child and pushes them closer to the brink of death. Whereas if the child was well nourished, then the child is less likely to suffer from infections such as diarrhea, because they have a better immunity as opposed to a poorly nourished child. Also, if we were to supplement the child with, say, zinc tablets during diarrheal episodes, then the zinc is a nutrient, but what it also does is it reduces the severity and the frequency of diarrheal episodes in children. So that is just one of the examples of how nutrition and wash can play a role in A, improving the nutrition of the child, and B, reducing the infection severity and frequency in a child.
Yeah, that's an excellent example, Anushree. Thank you. Did I notice somebody behind your shoulder hovering, getting ready to ask a question?
No. Can you do, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then, in that case, we probably have time for one very, very last question, as long as it's a short one. If anybody has just one more.
Well, just in this month's action sheet, I'm just thinking about evidence-based research, where it says undernutrition costs the global economy about $3.5 trillion each year, and yet tackling it is severely underfunded. Is that from the Lancet in 2013?
No. So the 3.5 trillion figure comes from a document that the Global Panel on Food Systems and Nutrition produced on assessing the impact of malnutrition in countries. So they were able to identify that, as I mentioned, that the loss of life, so the reduced survival rates, increased healthcare costs, and reduced economic productivity on account of malnutrition can cost the global economy around 3.5 trillion every year. I can share that document.
Oh, hello.
Can you hear me? Oh, brilliant. I have shared it already.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem.
Aaron, do we still have you?
Oh, Aaron's phone.
Sorry, everybody.
There we go.
Yeah, problem was at my end. I think my internet went horribly wrong. So did you get, what happened while I was away? Did anything exciting happen?
Not quite.
Okay. Let me see. Did you manage to get the chat that I sent though, right before I
can see it. It's the Global Panel Cost of Malnutrition report, and that meant the 3.5 trillion annual loss on account.
Exactly. Great. Okay, I'm glad that went through. So again, if you've got the chat, we've put the link through to the Global Panel Cost of Malnutrition report link just there if you'd like to do even more deeper reading. But look, we've come to the top of the hour, and I'm afraid I think we have, in fact, run out of time. So if we could just pause for a second and everybody give Anushree a big thank you and a big round of applause for joining us and for sharing her insights with us. That'd be great.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks, Anushree. So normally this is where we kick the guest off the call because we, do our super secret results wrap up. But I think we're safe leaving Anushree on the call.
I want to be a part of the super secret discussion.
Yeah, well, exactly. So in terms of, we'll wrap it up quickly. It was great to hear your updates at the start of the call, people chipping in with letters they've got back or things they did that we didn't know about. Please do make sure that if you've had success or taken some action, even if you don't have success, do let Naveed and Maddie know how you've gotten on, and also let them know how you've got on with this month's action as well. Particularly when it comes to parliamentarians, it's really important that we know the progress you're making there, because we're of course reaching out to all sorts of MPs in the office as well, and it's nice to be able to connect all the dots. But I think we will call it a night. I just want to finish with a huge thank you to all of you for giving up your Tuesday evening, for missing out on, I'm told by Jill, the Great British Bake Off. But I think hopefully the work we're going to do on nutrition for the world makes up for missing out on seeing cakes and all sorts of other fantastic creations being made on the telly tonight. Thanks, everybody. Have yourself a great evening. And again, thanks for everything that you do. It makes a really big difference. Good night.
Thank you, Aaron.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone. Ciao.
Bye.
Jill. Hey, me too.
In the sauna, Jill.
I haven't turned it on. I'm waving, I don't know what.
Oh well, lots of it's just questions that people ask, but there's a couple of